In Texas, prosecutors can file a murder case even when there is no body to examine. That is the position Suzanne Simpson's family has lived in since the night she disappeared. Her husband, Brad Chandler Simpson, was later charged with her murder. This story does not begin in a dark alley or an isolated highway. It begins in a neighborhood where people walk their dogs, wave at neighbors, and expect the street to stay quiet. Almost Park, Texas sits inside San Antonio like a pocket of old homes and well-kept lawns. Here's the question that matters. How does a mother of 4 vanish from a place like this, leaving behind a timeline but no return? As we go, notice the small clock-stamped moments and tell us in the comments which detail would have caught your attention first. Suzanne Simpson was 51 years old. Friends described her as warm, upbeat, and relentlessly capable. The kind of person who handled the calendar for everyone else and still showed up smiling. She was a lifelong San Antonian rooted in the city's rhythms and seasons. She graduated from the University of Texas at Austin in 1995 with a communications degree. Before real estate, she spent years working at Dell Computers. In the years that followed, she built a reputation in San Antonio as a luxury realtor with sharp instincts and a steady work ethic. Running wasn't a hobby for Suzanne. It was structure. She had completed 22 marathons and qualified for the elite Boston Marathon. A typical day meant miles logged before most people poured their first cup of coffee. At home, Suzanne was raising 4 children. They were 20, 18, 15, and 5 years old. Her life moved between school schedules, practices, and the quiet logistics of keeping a family steady. To the outside world, it looked like a household that worked. She and Brad had been married for 22 years. Brad was 53, a licensed real estate agent and investor involved with construction and property businesses around Central Texas. They lived in a century-old bungalow in Almost Park, a place people often describe as safe by default. On the surface, it was the kind of community that notices everything. Narrow streets, porch lights, and neighbors who recognize unfamiliar cars. It's the kind of setting where trouble feels out of place until you realize out of place doesn't mean impossible. Sunday, October 6, 2024 arrived like a normal fall weekend. Family plans, small errands, the usual push and pull of a household with kids at different ages. Nothing about the date announces itself when you wake up inside it. That evening, Suzanne put herself together to go out. A short, dark dress, tall tan heels, sandy blonde hair partly pulled back. It wasn't a costume or a statement, just the way you dress for dinner when life is busy and you take the night when you can. Around 8:00 p.m., Suzanne and Brad drove with their 5-year-old daughter to the Argyle, a private members-only dining club in Alamo Heights. The car ride is one of those ordinary spaces families occupy without thinking streetlights familiar turns the child in the back seat. They pulled up, walked inside, and blended into the kind of Sunday night that from the outside still looked completely normal. Suzanne Simpson didn't disappear out of nowhere. By the time October 2024 arrived, the ground beneath her life had already been shifting quietly, privately, and mostly out of public view. To neighbors, Almost Park still looked like the same careful, orderly place it had always been. Suzanne and Brad Chandler Simpson had been married for 22 years. They shared a home, routines, and 4 children with 4 different schedules pulling in 4 directions. From the outside, it read as stable long marriage, established neighborhood, busy family life. Brad was 53 and stood 6'5". He worked as a licensed real estate agent and an investor connected to real estate and construction businesses across Central Texas. Over the years, he'd been linked to multiple Texas companies, many of which later dissolved or went inactive. He had a history of conflict in business. Brad previously worked at Cotter & Sons from 2002 to 2012, and later became involved in disputes tied to former employers, one of them stretching for years and reaching the Texas Supreme Court. Money problems were part of the background noise. Between 2019 and 2020, American Express sued Brad twice for more than $25,000 in unpaid credit card debt. It didn't mean a household was collapsing, but it did mean pressure existed, and it had a paper trail. People who knew the couple described Brad as confident but also intensely jealous. One friend later said he tracked Suzanne's phone location, Another described him as controlling less about what happened in public, more about what happened when doors were closed. Suzanne was not a woman who drifted. Her life ran on structure work calls at odd hours, kids' calendars, and the discipline of distance running. That structure also meant she noticed patterns. She knew Brad tracked her. She knew when control was tightening. In August 2024, 2 months before she vanished, Suzanne shared something personal with her banker at Frost Bank, Gabriella Speicher. She said Brad was physically abusive. She said he regularly took her phone away. It wasn't a public report. It was a private disclosure to one person she trusted. Suzanne also said something else, simple, specific, and hard to forget. If she ever went missing, she told her banker they should look for her in a lake. It was not a dramatic speech. It was framed like a contingency plan delivered the way busy people speak when they're trying to stay practical. Despite these red flags, there were no police reports, no protective orders, nothing on the surface that would force official intervention. In a neighborhood where crime felt distant, the most serious danger was positioned where no patrol car could see it. Suzanne's mother, Barbara Clark, would later say she knew of at least one prior physical altercation between the couple. She wasn't describing a constant public spectacle. She was describing something hidden, something that surfaced, then disappeared back into the private space of marriage. Barbara had started to think in logistics, not feelings. She had a plan for Suzanne to move in with her. The youngest child would attend school near Barbara's neighborhood. It was the kind of plan families make when they're trying to create a safe exit without turning life into a headline. And there was another layer, the phone. Suzanne said Brad would confiscate it, then tell the children she had lost it. A small lie with a practical purpose, control the narrative, remove a tool, and make the absence feel ordinary. To the outside world, Suzanne kept functioning. She still worked. She still ran. She still managed a household with 4 kids. That's what made the risk so hard to measure. From the sidewalk, her life looked like motion, like normalcy, like nothing was breaking. By early October, the plan to leave existed. The disclosures had been made, and the sense of control inside the marriage had been named at least to a few people. Almost Park remained calm, porch lights turning on as evenings cooled, families settling into Sunday routines. Sunday, October 6, 2024 arrived like any other day on the calendar. School, ahead errands to run, dinner plans to keep, and the familiar expectation that a long marriage in a quiet neighborhood would hold everything in place. At around 8:00 p.m. on Sunday, October 6, 2024, Suzanne Simpson and her husband Brad Chandler Simpson arrived at the Argyle in Alamo Heights with their 5-year-old daughter. Witnesses said a verbal argument between the couple became disruptive. Later, their daughter would describe Brad pushing Suzanne against a wall and hitting her in the face, with Suzanne appearing injured at her elbow. At about 8:30 p.m., Suzanne left the Argyle with the child. Between 8:40 and 8:51 p.m., surveillance captured them shopping inside an H-E-B grocery store under bright lights and fixed cameras. At 9:15 p.m., Suzanne called a family friend and said she was coming over. 1 minute later, she called her mother, Barbara Clark, and reported that Brad had assaulted her and that she was in pain. At that same moment, Brad accessed the AT&T account and suspended Suzanne's mobile phone service. The line she had been using went dark, cutting off a simple way to reach her. By 9:25 p.m., surveillance confirmed Suzanne arrived at her friend's house in Alamo Heights. The visit did not produce a public emergency call, and Suzanne did not remain there for the night. At 10:22 p.m., the Find My app placed Suzanne's iPhone back at the Simpson residence in Almost Park. That location would become the last known point for her phone. Between 10:00 and 11:00 p.m., a neighbor across the street heard arguing outside his bedroom window. The voices got louder, pulling him to look outside toward the front garden. He told police he saw Suzanne and Brad in a physical fight. Suzanne tried to pull away while Brad held on, pulling downward as she worked to break free. She did break free. Suzanne ran toward the brushy wooded area east of the home. Brad chased after her into the dark, closing the distance. The neighbor went inside to grab a flashlight. As he came back, he heard 2 to 3 screams coming from the wooded area. Those screams were the last sounds anyone reported hearing from Suzanne Simpson. Around midnight, the neighbor heard Brad's black 2019 GMC Sierra start and leave the residence. 1 to 2 hours later, he heard the truck return. At 11:09 p.m., Brad's phone began cycling on and off in lockdown mode, a stop-start pattern that continued into the next day. The timing sat inside the same window when Suzanne's phone was last seen at the house. At 12:33 a.m., HEB surveillance showed Brad's truck with a large ice chest in the cargo bed and oversized container visible in the bed under the camera's timestamp. At 7:15 a.m., Suzanne's phone registered its last activity. The coordinates associated with that ping placed it in a business parking lot in Moss Park. The phone was never recovered. At 7:53 a.m., surveillance from Howard Early Childhood Center showed Brad dropping their daughter off at school. In the truck bed were white trash bags tied with red string and what appeared to be an ice chest. Suzanne did not pick up her child that afternoon. Suzanne did not call the school. Suzanne did not show up anywhere she was expected to be. At 3:00 p.m. on October 7th, the school called when their 5-year-old daughter still hadn't been picked up. It was unusual enough to trigger the call because Suzanne typically handled pickup. At 3:27 p.m., surveillance showed Brad arriving to pick up his daughter. The school day ended, the parking lot cleared, and Suzanne still did not appear. At 9:57 p.m. on October 7th, a friend called Brad and learned he had not contacted police. She said she would file a missing person report herself. 14 minutes later, Brad left a voicemail for Alamo Heights Police Chief Fidel Villagran, saying he hadn't seen Suzanne since about 11:00 p.m., and claiming she had lost her phone at HEB the moment police were formally alerted. Once Suzanne Simpson was reported missing, the first priority was narrow identify who last had access to her and lock the timeline in place. In Almos Park, the last confirmed contact point centered on one person, her husband Brad Chandler Simpson. Brad told police he hadn't seen Suzanne since about 11:00 p.m. and claimed she had lost her phone at HEB. But the digital trail did not match that story. Her phone's location had already been seen back at the home that night. There was also the service cutoff. Suzanne made a call for help, and at the same moment, her phone service was suspended through the account. That parallel action became part of the early focus, because it changed what Suzanne could do next, instantly. Outside the house, a neighbor's account placed Brad and Suzanne together in the front area late that night, followed by Suzanne running toward the wooded section east of the property. It was a timeline anchor that didn't rely on memory alone. When officers tried to follow up, Brad failed to appear for a scheduled interview. Instead, he relocated to a ranch property in Bandera County, creating distance between himself, the neighborhood, and the growing urgency around Suzanne's disappearance. On October 8th, Brad's messages to James Cotter added another pressure point. He asked Cotter to meet quickly and emphasized leaving certain items in a pump house, especially that gun. The language was brief, direct, and time-sensitive. By then, the search effort was widening. Almos Park police were no longer dealing with a routine missing person call. Agencies began coordinating resources, and the priority shifted to locating Brad, assessing risk, and preventing further harm. That same day, Brad created 2 notes on his phone, one titled This Next Life and another labeled Last Will and Testament. Inside, he apologized for physically assaulting Suzanne on prior dates, including October 6, 2024. Just after 1:30 a.m., authorities located Brad on Interstate 10 East in Kendall County and took him into custody. He had visible lacerations and bruising on his arms and hands. He showed little outward reaction. Brad was arrested and charged that night with assault involving family violence and unlawful restraint. With the arrest, the immediate public threat was considered contained. 1 person in custody, 1 disappearance still unresolved, and a clock that would not rewind. With Suzanne Simpson still missing, the case moved forward on what could be preserved physical traces, digital movement, and recorded timelines. The prosecution's framework did not rely on a recovered body. It relied on what remained after the disappearance. Searches of the Simpson home documented details consistent with the reported argument and struggle, including damage on an interior wall. Investigators also recovered supplies tied to disposal efforts, cement and heavy-duty trash materials items later referenced in court filings and reporting. Digital evidence formed a second spine. Suzanne's phone activity ended after the night she vanished, while Brad's device behavior showed repeated cycling in a locked state. Surveillance timestamps and app location points were placed beside each other minute by minute to show opportunity and movement. Video became the third layer. Cameras captured Brad's truck in the hours after Suzanne was last heard from showing large containers and bundled materials in the bed. Other footage and receipts documented purchases including cement heavy-duty bags and cleaning-related items. Then there were the actions taken to erase. Investigators later described burned electronics recovered at a ranch property in Bandera County, devices reduced to fragments but still part of the narrative of concealment. A separate thread involved Brad's longtime associate James Val Cotter. Police recovered a prohibited rifle hidden behind a wall-mounted television in Cotter's home, and Cotter was charged in connection with evidence concealment and weapons possession. In December 2024, reporting indicated that Suzanne's DNA was found on a reciprocating saw. Authorities said Brad attempted to conceal an item prosecutors treated as a decisive physical link in a case without remains. Brad was indicted and faced multiple felony counts including murder and evidence tampering charges. His defense challenged the indictment as too vague, arguing the state could not specify the manner of death. In April 2025, Judge Joel Perez denied that motion, allowing the murder charge to stand. By late 2025, the case file had expanded into terabytes of discovery surveillance phone records, forensic work, while Suzanne's body still had not been found. Pre-trial matters were set for January 20, 2026. With jury trials scheduled to begin February 13, 2026. As of mid-January 2026, that is where the legal road ends in the public record, a murder case advancing toward trial built on timestamps, witness accounts, and physical traces without the closure of recovery. The verdict has not yet been delivered, but the machinery of court is already in motion.